Guess who got brands talking? Brandlive.co.za.
A very good afternoon to all our listeners. We coming to you live from 27 Boxes in Melville. The show is Breaking the Chains Recovery Radio. My very special guest and friend and brother, Warren, is my co-host. We also walk this road of recovery together. Good morning, Warren.
Good morning, Uncle Manny. Good morning to all our listeners out there. It might be cold outside, but I think we're going to be burning it up in studio today. How you doing, Uncle Manny?
No, I'm good, Warren. Always good in recovery. Talk about burning it up. My soul's on fire. My imagination is fired up, and I've been rocketed into a fourth dimension.
And we're ready to go.
So, Warren, I know you. I know your story, you know. But the purpose of the show is to educate and to empower people that suffer from addiction. And as much as I know your story, for the listeners out there, what led you into recovery?
What led me into recovery, if I look back, Uncle Manny, my mother told me about 2 years ago, as a baby I cried a lot. I was a sickly baby, but I cried incestuously from a very young age. I cried, and there was always something missing. If I go back to my school days, if I go back to my childhood, I always had an emptiness. 8 years old, I discovered this thing called alcohol. Now, as we discussed last week, alcohol is a drug, and it's an easily accessible drug. There was alcohol in my home. There was alcohol around. The mom used to have a liqueur before bed, and I took my first drink at 8 years old. All this emptiness, this sense of emptiness and lack of fulfillment in life, I took that drink, and all of a sudden I had a sense of ease and comfort come over me. This sense of ease and comfort that alcohol gave me, it quickly became an obsession. I became obsessed with how I could get my next drink. You know, Uncle Manny, I remember as a kid going to food and wine shows with my uncle. I went through with him to the show, and 8-9 years old, my obsession was, how can I get my hands on a drink? How can I get my hands on this thing which gave me that sense of ease and comfort that left me feeling okay with the world at once? Fast track, 20 odd years, I found myself addicted to heroin, hopeless. I had been to 44 rehabs, all of which had done very little for my life. And I found myself at the gates of breaking the chains. 24th of October last year, I found myself at the gates of breaking the chains, broken and without any hope. But later on, looking back, I would realize that was where my journey started, and hope was born from that very hopelessness I just described.
No, you know, that's so fantastic, and many of us suffer in ignorance. I know I always said I suffered in ignorance. I never knew there's some solution to what is a very common problem in society. I always refer to it as the wicked social ills. We're never going to totally eradicate them, but we can make a difference one life at a time.
Indeed.
And for my role in your life, I'm very grateful, you know. The other question that I want to ask you, you know, you speak about 44 rehabs. That's a big number, you know. I'm not judging you. I've been to 10 rehabs myself. And it must have cost your family, not just in financial terms, but in emotional and spiritual terms. Must have been a huge debt that you need to pay back, you know. And was that ever part of your thinking?
Well, I would always enter rehab, and I'd go into a rehab center, and the main emphasis would be on my mental, it would be on my physical, it would be on my religious. And all of these treatment centers charging 30, 40, up to 95,000 Rand a pop, they never educated me on the fact that I have this spiritual sickness. Now, you speak about my family, Uncle Manny, and I'm glad you brought that up. My family, every time I went into a center, they were sold hope. They were sold a false sense of hope that, you know what, put Warren with us, pay us this outrageous sum of money, and we'll show him how not to use drugs. I'm Jewish by birth, for the listeners who don't know that. Many of them tried to push me towards other religious avenues which didn't sit right with my soul. Many of them tried to medicate me, put me on methadone, put me on Suboxone, legal forms of drugs, antidepressants, all these things, and all these things cost a lot of money. I would estimate through the Jewish community who paid, through my family who paid, through so many people who financially contributed over the years, I'd estimate probably about 2 million rand was spent, and spent in vain, trying to get me to a place where I would recover and where the drug problem would cease. I got to breaking the chains last year, and my family had given up. They had given up on spending money. They had given up on me ever getting better. I believe I was sent there as a last resort to get me off the streets. I was dying. I walked into the center. My feet were rotten from injecting into them. I walked into the center. My mother said she would never speak to me again. 2 weeks later, she was there. A lot thank you to you, Uncle Mannie, speaking to her and promoting that this isn't a physical, mental, religious solution that we work. It's a spiritual solution. And I started learning that spirituality is not about any particular religion. Spirituality happens between people. Spirituality is how I live my life and how I give and how I interact with my fellow human beings. Because we need not look far for God. God is right here between the two of us right now. God is right now with our listeners. God is in everything I do. And upon tapping into that power and that resource by which I today live my life, I was able to realize that my amends, they're very important. There's a big wreckage behind me in my past, and you mentioned the money spent. That's the financial amends. There's a lot of amends that can be never be made. There's people who I've introduced to drugs. There's people who I've hurt who are no longer here with us, who've died. My grandfather. There's a lot of amends that need to be made every day, and the best way I'm making those amends is how I live my life today. If I live my life right today, if I see that addict at the robot and I give him a 10 rand, not caring what he's going to do with it, knowing that was once me, knowing the pain and suffering he's going through, knowing where he's at, where his spirit is, the pain that is in his spirit, I'm living amends. When my mother phones me at 2 o'clock in the morning and there's a problem and she needs my help, I'm living my amends by being there for her. The financial, that will take a lifetime to repay. But my living amends, that's what it's all about every day.
No, you're absolutely right. They say the greatest amend we can make is living clean and living properly.
Indeed.
You know? And the sad reality of addiction is that it affects at least 16 people that are close and people we love. But the drugs are so elusive and remove so much of your sanity and your spirituality that to hurt and to take away people's souls through our addiction comes as second nature, and our families don't know how to deal with this, and they're looking for hope, and they get pushed around and they get sent around to a number of places, and eventually they give up. They react by kicking us out into the street, by having us locked up, by beating us. You know, I've been beaten, I've been locked up, I've lived on the street. And you're a Jewish boy, and I'm half Indian and half colored, and we went through the same things, you know.
Exact same program of recovery that I live today, and that anyone out there, regardless of all these factors, is living.
So we have a common problem and we have a common solution.
Sure.
And the solution isn't that evasive. If there's people out there that have been suffering for decades with the disease of addiction, whether it's illicit drugs, whether it's alcohol, whether it's prescription medication, there's a way that works. There's a way that is proven for the last 86 years to have solid results, and sitting in the studio right now is proof of that results. The fact that we're able to comprehend and still speak and live value-adding, responsible lives speaks volumes for the program. And I don't think Breaking the Chains, the Recovery Center, can take credit for that, because we just adopted the program that was given to us, I believe, by God 86 years ago through Bill Wilson, one of the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, who in 1935 already knew me when I wasn't born, who already understood my disease, who already understood what my solution was. So I'm very grateful. I'll be eternally grateful. Today, Warren, it's your day. The show is going to eventually broaden into various topics around addiction and around recovery and There's highlights and there's lows that we're going to experience. So what we've done last week and what we're doing this week, we're just introducing myself and Warren to the listeners. We want the listeners to get involved. We want listeners to tell other people about the show. I don't think there's many shows like this in this country. I think overseas there might be a few, but not also that many. So we want to get the buzz going. We want people to understand that they don't need to continue the pain and they don't need to continue the suffering. So while we're at it, Warren, what was your most painful moment in addiction?
I think the most painful moment for me came after I got sober. After I got sober, I had been sober about 2 months, and I sat down with my mother. Now, I'm an only child, and when you speak about this being the only show in the country that covers addiction, that's a real sad state that our nation is in, that people do not understand how many of the socio problems we have, how much overflow comes from addiction, and how much pain and suffering within society is as a direct result, those 16 people you spoke about, of addiction. My most painful moment, I was 2 months sober. I sat down with my mother, and she had told me over the years how I had hurt her, and I had never listened. And for the first time, I sat down and I listened to the pain and suffering I was causing to the person who had stuck by me and loved me the most in my life. That for me was my step one. There's the first step in the program, 12-step program. And I realized exactly how powerless I was, exactly how unmanageable I had become. And from that was born a great willingness to accept that I can't do this. I need to connect to a power. And I would say that moment for me hurt the most. But from that sprung so much beautiful things to come.
Okay, you're listening to Warren and Mannie from Breaking the Chains Recovery Radio, coming to you live from Boksburg from Melville out at 27 boxes. We're going to take an ad break and we'll be back right after the break.
Making a bold statement yet blending into the surrounding suburbs of Melville, 27 Boxes is a realization of edgy design and practical implementation. A radical departure from the shopping malls of our generation, yet not a return to the high streets of our youth. 27 Boxes showcases the best of a shopping centre set in a garden, surrounded by the bohemian suburb that is Melville. 27 Boxes, shop, play, eat.
The Dramatic Talk with myself, Bongani Drama. Bringing you insightful conversations on the Convo Corner, your latest celebrity news on Dramatainment, and your latest fashion news on Fashion Fade.
This is Bongani.
And myself, Rose Ratsaga, bringing you your latest news and sports updates.
Every Wednesdays, 2 to 3 p.m. Only on www.brandlife.co.za.
In your face, all over the place. We're online 24/7. 24/7. You're listening to the hottest internet station.
Brand Live.
No doubt.
You're listening to brandlive.co.za.
Kanya. We're back live. So Warren, we're having a conversation where we were talking about the pain and the suffering or what addicts go through, you know, in the daily life, if you want to call it a life. You know, I like to call it a curse. You know, I know it was a curse. During the break, I was speaking to Elvira. Big shout out to her, you know, for giving us this opportunity of carrying the message of hope to those that still suffer in ignorance. And she was saying it happened to her once in her life. You know, it happened to me every day where I didn't know what was going on, when I didn't understand what was going on, when I wanted a way out, when I looked and I searched and I paid and I prayed, I cried out, you know. So today I'm very grateful for the fact that at some point the man upstairs listened, you know. And I want to know from you, what was the most important principles that you took out of the program of recovery? We talk about the damage to society, the crime committed, the cost to prisons, the cost to courts of addicts that, if they're given the solution, no longer need to transfer those costs onto society. But I want to know from you, what's your take on that?
So, Uncle Mannie, you speak about those costs to society. One would be tempted, and I believe it would be rather accurate to use the word burdens to society. I was for many years a burden to society, not just my family, but to my community, to my friends, and to everyone who came onto my path. I caused harm, I lived selfishly, I hurt these people, and the only consideration I had was for myself. They call it a selfish, self-centered disease, and that's exactly what my disease was all about. It was about me getting what I wanted, which was drugs, and me fulfilling my own desires and sustaining this lifestyle and not caring anything about those around me. I came into recovery, I went into Breaking the Chains, and about 3 weeks into my sobriety at Breaking the Chains, I was at the Male Center in Lenasia, and a big shout out to all the guys listening there. Lots of love to you all, especially my brother Ali, the caretaker of the center, who I want to thank from the bottom of my heart for teaching me a very important principle. That principle was selflessness. And to you, Uncle Mannie, I love you too much. I don't have to tell you, you know. And that principle which Uncle Mannie taught me, which Ali taught me, which all the guys I was there with helped me see, was that it's not about me anymore. The principle was selflessness. And I started living my life outside of myself. Being in the center for 3 weeks, I spent my first 3 weeks in complete depression. I couldn't accept what I had done to myself. I couldn't accept how I had hurt the people I loved. When on drugs, it's easy to ignore all these things. It's easy to get intoxicated and forget about what everyone else is going through. But I got sober and it hit me like a ton of bricks. And the only solution I found was selflessness. I got up from my bed in the center and I started helping people. I started seeing what I could give to life instead of what I could take. I started seeing what I could invest in people. And I realized something really beautiful. I had a profound moment, an epiphany, if you would call it that. And I realized that I'm powerless. I cannot help myself. There's this power out there, this God that can help me. And this God can do for me what I cannot do for myself, which is take away this desire to use drugs, which is take away the pain and the suffering and the loneliness and the fear. But there's a deal. There's a deal I made. I did my third step, where I made a deal with God. I said to him, God, relieve me of this bondage of self, not so that I may go out there and make a lot of money, not so that I may go out there and have the most beautiful woman and the nicest car. Relieve me of the bondage of self so that I may better do thy will. And God does for me what I cannot do for myself. But the deal I have with God is I do for God today what God cannot do for himself on earth. God cannot come down to earth and help the next addict. God cannot come down to earth and be kind to that beggar at the robot. God cannot come down to earth and do these things. I do God's work and God does my work for me. And that for me was the epiphany. That was the moment where I realized that how I live my life, these spiritual principles, when I live these spiritual principles, I start earning spiritual credits. And those spiritual credits are the most beautiful thing. From them come beautiful gifts. And the true gifts of recovery are experienced by the next man, not by me. The only gift I get is a sense of peace, serenity, fulfillment, and purpose in my life.
No, I get the same feeling. So, as much as we're very different, what's important for me, and when I started my journey, was exactly that willingness to be of service to your fellow man. And it's no different to Ubuntu, for argument's sake. And I fell in love with that concept. And one of the reasons, one of the desires I had was to give people an opportunity where they could have a chance at life. And we live in a country where, because of demographics and class and race, there's huge gaps in what is available to people, And when we started this journey, it was for people like yourself and for Joe Soap out there that had no direction and never knew that there's help available. I'm glad to announce that the journey has taken me, and we've got huge success, and we now have a female facility where females can be treated by females and managed by females and be given the program of recovery by females without any sexual innuendos and advances being made on them. So the journey that we're on, I think the introductions have been done. People understand now what we're doing on the show. And I want to set the tone for next week. Next week we're going to be discussing women, our mums, our sisters that are on prescription drugs or illicit drugs that sadly, whether they know it or unknowingly, drives them into prostitution and into crime and destroys their dignity and their humanity. But there's hope because the program can restore all that. And no matter what you've lost, no matter where you've been, we're not interested in that. I think what's more interesting is that where you are and where you want to be. And the program will fill the gaps in between. Have you found, Warren, that since you started this journey, that the days are better, the food tastes better, the air smells fresher?
Well, with that spiritual experience I spoke of earlier, which was vital for me, I found that I started appreciating the small things in life. I started appreciating waking up in the morning and having had a good night's sleep. My first 30 days in sobriety, I didn't sleep. Having a meal, I sobered up in Lenasia and there was a lot of curry and I came to love the curry.
Well, the masala desert.
The masala desert. And I came to love the food. I came to appreciate having a conversation with another human being. You speak about the female center, Uncle Mannie, and I believe it's so important that men and women, when they go into recovery centers, are not given that distraction of a relationship, because it's very easy to fill that spiritual void with a member of the opposite sex. For some people out there, a member of the same sex. But the important thing is that we focus on our recovery, and I really want to congratulate you on the Female Center and providing a safe space where women can recover. The topic next week is going to be an interesting one, because out there are many women in abusive relationships. There are many women who are stuck in the cycle of addiction and they're not being given an opportunity to recover. And next week we want to take a look at why that exactly is.
Okay, thank you, Warren. It looks like we need to take another break, and we're going to go for a break.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?
Brandlife.co.za is Thought Leadership Radio. It's a new way to communicate your brand, your value, and what we think about your industry. Be a leader, be a voice, and we will help you shape your industry. Our radio platform is for thought leaders who want to share insights, businesses who want to create value for their databases, organizations who want to control their message, for those that drive change. Make your brand come alive on brandlife.co.za, harnessing the power of talk radio.
brandlife.co.za.
Okay, we're back. We're alive, we're kicking, and we're living.
Breaking the Chains Recovery Radio.
Okay, Warren, so we've done the introductions.
Yes.
Any shout-outs from your side? We're almost at the end of the show.
From my side, I want to send a very special shout-out to a friend of mine in Miami, Florida, also a recovered addict who practices the same program that we practice here in South Africa. His name's Daniel. Lots of love to you, Dan. All the guys at Breaking the Chains Male Center in Lens, Female Center in Orange Grove, my respect and my heartfelt wishes and hopes and prayers are with you guys, that you find what we have found that is so beautiful, that thing being recovery. And then a special shout out to my mother. Lots of love to you, Mom, and to everyone who's helped me on this journey, especially you, Uncle Mannie. Thank you for saving my life, boss.
No, Warren, it makes me think. My mom's no more around, but you saw me 13 years clean. So I'm quite grateful for that. Shout out to Raymond, Liverpool addict, 3 years clean. Shout out to Tirushan, 1 year clean. And shout out to Tony Montana, the rat under the bridge. 3 years clean, you know. Big up, soldiers. Keep the fires burning.
Well done,
keep
guys.
the flags flying high. And we're going to see you next week, Monday, from 12 to 12:30, from 27 boxes. We no more live in the box, but we broadcast from the box.
From
Thank
the
you.
box. And a shout out to all our listeners in Boxburg
And Melville.
and Melville. Breaking the Chains Recovery Radio over and out.
Harnessing the power of talk radio. Brandlive.co.za